welcome to Music Mania. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today, for the 7th episode of the show, we're going to be talking about not very much new stuff, actually. There was one EP released and 2 singles released that I was personally made aware of or knew about ahead of time. Basically, nothing else came out, so the bulk of this video is actually talking about some things that I was catching up on, essentially as a result of what I listened to in the early portions of the week. But because there's no albums to talk about, we're going to skip the albums and instead move on to the EPs that we're going to talk about. Let's move on over to my desktop over here and start off with Ameonna's, I probably pronounced that very terribly, I'm sorry, Ameonna's The Birth of Death EP, which just released this weekend. And this band is one that is comprised of, if I'm not mistaken, 3 previous Chelsea Grin members. And based off of this and stuff that we'll talk about a little bit later, I think I need to check out some classic Chelsea Grin because I have kind of neglected to do that over the years for one reason or another, not any like super intense interest being primary amongst them. But checking out this EP especially really kind of changed my mind on the fact that I should probably be going back and checking some of that stuff out because The Birth of Death was pretty great. I enjoyed it a lot. It's at least a 4-star for me, that is for sure. So I recommend The Birth of Death. I should put my quotation marks around that like I normally do. Review album. And of course, just as I normally do, all ratings are subject to change. I generally write brief reviews for albums and EPs after the fact, after recording these videos. Sometimes when I do that, I change the ratings a little bit. That might not happen with this one, but it also might happen anyway. But that is the only new EP that released over the week. So let's go ahead and jump over to talk about singles now, starting off with Forced Diet Reassignment by To The Grave. Now, To The Grave is a very interesting band for me. I think over the years, the more stuff that they put out, the less that I actually like them. Thought that their debut record was pretty good, pretty decent. Epilogue, which was kind of like a re-release, remastering of that, plus a handful of extra songs, basically a deluxe edition of that initial album, was also pretty solid for what it was. Had a couple of great new songs on it, but most everything they've done since then has kind of been very hit or miss with me. Some of it's good, some of it I'm not as big of a fan on. This single is definitely one I'm not as big of a fan on. I'm probably going to give this 1 star because I just didn't really enjoy it, and because it didn't satisfy me to really any degree as far as deathcore goes, and I'm not a deathcore hater. Deathcore and metalcore are my thing, even though I prefer metalcore, but To The Grave has just kind of fallen off for me over the years, and this very, very brief single definitely didn't change my mind, unfortunately. Next up is Blood Red, the next single by Landmarks on their upcoming album, whatever it is their upcoming album is called. I forget off the top of my head, but their upcoming record is one that I'm excited for. Very many of these singles have kind of hit for me well enough to be excited. Sulfur and Creature are great. A Line in the Dust is good too. Blood Red is also a perfectly decent song. Not anything super crazy, super memorable. A little bit more French than I was expecting there to be, admittedly, but all the singles on this have been pretty good so far. I'm looking forward to the record. Landmarks is kind of like one of those very specific bands that like I really enjoy their albums when they come out, and then I just don't really listen to them the rest of the time. So I always like when they release a new record, and this upcoming one is probably going to be no different. But from here on, we stop talking about the singles, or at least the new release singles, instead move on to my listens. But don't click off too quickly because my listens were a little bit more interesting this week. First, we'll jump through very quickly a couple of re-listens from a little bit earlier in the year, things that I've already talked about on this series and rated before. That would be Lost Shores by Swept to Sea, which I listened to a couple weeks back and talked about. I gave it a quick re-listen. This is the review that I did on Musicboard if you want to check it out, and check out anything else I do on Musicboard. My link is in the description below, but I did a re-listen of Lost Shores. I also did a re-listen of Oneironaut by Wide Eyes, one of my favorite albums, because I've been doing a little bit of writing this past week, and while writing I tend to listen to instrumental music, and usually instrumental metal because I like metal. And this is one of my favorite albums, so this was one of the ones that I gave it a listen to, and I enjoyed it just as I always do. But now we're going to get into something a little bit more interesting. We talked about Ameonna's most recent EP release. Now let's talk about the couple EPs that they released in 2024, which I also enjoyed quite a bit, just like this initial one. Goddess Rain was on pretty similar levels of the more recent EP. They're pretty equal for me in terms of the overall quality and how much I enjoyed them. So I'm going to go ahead and say I recommend Goddess Rain, just like I recommend the previous EP. Go ahead and select that. I would say Identity Crisis and Last Respects were my favorite tracks. Cut Me, Crave Me also was very good in its own right. But I think Hollow Idols was the only one on this EP that I was a little bit more mixed on. Everything else I really enjoyed a lot. And then Goddess Wept was the debut EP that these guys released a little bit earlier in 2024, right about 13 months ago or so, give or take, right around the time of this video's release. This EP is definitely a little bit weaker than the other two of them to me, not by any super extreme margin, but definitely enough for me to notice that I didn't quite enjoy this one as much. There were still a couple great songs, still had its memorable moments, but felt more like a proof of concept, whereas the other two EPs were a little bit better. I'm going to give this one 3 stars. I still recommend it because it was still good, but definitely not quite as special as the other two were, even though these 3 EPs, this band as a whole up to this point, hasn't been like reinventing anything within deathcore. They haven't done anything super unique with it. It's been a very solid example of it, and considering that Chelsea Grin was kind of one of the front runners, one of the OGs of deathcore back in the day, and I believe all three of these members were previous, members of Chelsea Grin. The fact that the members of this were members of one of the OG deathcore bands kind of means that I'm expecting for them to have a little bit more of a classic sound, and it's overall satisfied. And if you wanted to see, my general ranking of the actual discography, I'm going to be starting to do some more of these lists on Musicboard over time as I listen to more artists, and especially as I get through full discographies and the like. This is how I would rank these 3 EPs from this artist. Goddess Rain and The Birth of Death are pretty interchangeable overall. I like them both a lot. Goddess Wept is the one that is notably weaker in my opinion. But that means that I have technically gotten through the essential discography of Ameonna, so I'm going to go ahead and rate the artist overall. Taking the average of the ratings that I have given the band between those 3 EPs, you get about a 3.6, 3.7 rating overall. I'm going to give these guys a 4 out of 5 entirely and say I recommend, and just say the band name, plus an average rating, 3.67 out of 5. And just kind of I'll actually put that in the description down here and say, yeah, because the average rating should be in a different spot than my full-blown rating, but I'm choosing to round that up to 4 as opposed to keeping it closer to the 3.5, because the 2 EPs that I rated 4 stars were definitely good enough to justify these guys being a full 4-star. So that is my rating for that. Beyond listening to the other EPs by Ameonna, this week I have gone through and listened to the rest of what I had not previously listened to by Mirar, starting off with Mare, the EP that they released in 2024. I forget exactly what day it was I listened to this. I believe it was yesterday, just so that I know. This EP was pretty good. Mirar is still kind of an artist that I have like a strange relationship with. I only recently decided that I might kind of like them a bit. Still don't love everything that they've done, but generally speaking, I enjoy the average. When they get a little bit crazier and do some more of the weird, funny sounds and everything in there, is when I like the music a little bit less in general. But as a rule, I've really enjoyed what I've listened to from these guys as I've gotten a little bit more into their work, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. I'll go ahead and put this as I listened to yesterday. I'm going to give Mare 4 stars as well as Ascension. I think, actually, no, I think Mare's a step down. I do recommend the EP, but I don't like it quite as much as the full album that just came out pretty recently, even though overall it was good. There were a few songs that were pretty good. The first track, tracks 3 and 4 were great. I think the last song didn't need to be nearly 9 minutes long. Like more than half of that was just kind of nothing really going on compared to the previous tracks, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. But overall, I did enjoy the EP, so there's that. But beyond the EP, I listened to all of the standalone singles that these guys have come out with over the past couple years, in between the albums, in between the EPs, in between the full releases, the individual singles. So I'm not going to talk too much on each of these individual songs so as to not waste too much time, but I'll go through them all in the order that I listened to them. Lisette was fine. It was a serviceable song, nothing too special, but nothing too offensive either, so 2.5 stars for that. Contrast, I thought, in comparison, was notably a lot stronger. I enjoyed this one a lot more. This one felt a little bit less like the Mirar that we've come to know, the Mirar that they came to be, and more, I guess, generic, but generic isn't a bad thing to me. I tend to enjoy the things that I know that I like and enjoy, so the song was one of those things. Night Prayers was a little bit different, a little bit more, not necessarily proggy for Mirar, but it was definitely different than the previous two songs, and it was just as enjoyable as the previous one, albeit for very different reasons. There were just a small portion of it that I didn't love as much, but the rest of the song was really great. This one nearly got 4.5 stars out of me. Madeline was definitely the one standout track here in that I didn't actually like it very much. I didn't hate it, but it was by far the one that I enjoyed the least of all these like standalone singles, not least because the first like minute of it is just kind of what the first full song of Ascension does, and it's too much too soon. I feel like when I'm trying to listen to these guys, I have to like be eased into the soundscape, and this track definitely does not do that. Annunciation was a notable step up. This one nearly got 4 stars, but again, just a short section there in the middle of it that wasn't 100% to my liking. Still liked the song quite a bit overall. That's pretty much my average rating, is 3.5 stars. It's the most common rating that I give things, so that's by no means an offensive score. I have no idea how to pronounce this title. Dijonais or something like that. 4.5 stars, really great. It's funny that of all these tracks, the ones with vocals, the 3 singles with vocals, I generally enjoyed more than some of the earlier singles that didn't have vocals, which is weird because Mirar doesn't typically do vocals. But this track was definitely standout. It was great. Another example of them being a little bit less Mirar specifically and more kind of like just general core or core adjacent music. But I really liked the musicality and I liked the vocals on this one a lot. Toccata was also really great, perhaps a little bit longer than it needed to be. This one was like 8.5 minutes or something like that. Feel like it didn't fully need all that time, but it did utilize the time interestingly, wasn't repetitive or anything like that. So I still enjoyed it. 3.5 stars for that one. Deluge is also really great. Another example of, this one was almost just 4 stars instead of 4.5 stars, but another example of great song, great vocals, overall grand total product that I really enjoyed. Samson was a very different song. It's funny how well the sort of Death Funk and Mirar soundscapes kind of blend together for this track. If I were to re-listen to any of these guys' individual singles, this is not one of the ones I'd be more likely to come back to for any random reason, but it was still fun and enjoyable in its own way. And if you were curious how I might rank all of the releases from Mirar, I did a discography ranking while I was listening to the individual singles. You'll see Ascension. The album is my favorite thing here, aside from that intro track and the first full song, which I still don't really click with on that. The rest of the album is great. Mare's pretty good and it's in there. These 2 singles I think I like more than anything on Mare, but don't quite come to being able to topple an entire album, for example. You have a couple singles that I thought are pretty solid from them, a weirder one, a couple just... Actually, I'm going to go ahead and edit this one on the fly. I like Night Prayers more than I like Samson. Samson's fun and interesting, but Night Prayers is a little bit more to my taste, so we'll do that. Annunciation is probably better than Samson, but Samson's just fun, so we'll keep that out as, and then these 2 are the notable standouts of ones that I just don't think are anything super special or memorable, or rather anything that I don't like particularly much from these guys. But based off of the average ratings in here. I'm going to go ahead and also rate Mirar as an artist because I finished all of their work. I'm going to give these guys a 3.5. So I recommend Mirar as an artist. My average rating was 3.6 for these guys, rounded down. So we'll go ahead and say that the 3.5 is still appropriate for the rating. I think the album and the EP are good. I really enjoy a couple of the singles, but overall as an artist, I wouldn't put these guys at like a 4 as opposed to a 3.5. My average ratings fall anywhere from 3.5 from 3-star to 4-star, with 3.5 being like the true average for me. And Mirar doesn't quite cross the line into being slightly above average in my opinion, but that is just my opinion. Let me know how you would rate any of these songs or anything. If you want to check out my music profile or my music board profile again, you can go ahead and do that in the description below. It is down there. If you want to comment on or give me your ratings for your rankings for some of these artists or anything like that, those lists are public on my profile, so you can check all that stuff out if you would like. Thank you for watching this video if you did. I had a good time with my music listening this week, just kind of catching up on a couple artists for no reason, even though there wasn't a whole ton of new releases. It was nice to just be able to listen to something that I wanted to catch up on, that I've been meaning to for the past month, but haven't had the chance to, so that was a good time. Thank you guys again for watching. I really appreciate it. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys next week.